Story 1. Everyone in my town wakes up at the same time. The first time it happened, I thought it was just a coincidence. I woke up at exactly 3:17 in the morning. No alarm, no noise from outside, not even a dream fading from my head. It was just instant awareness. My eyes snapped open, my heart was steady, and the room was completely silent. I grabbed my phone, squinting at the screen. 3:17. I rolled over, more annoyed than anything else, and tried to force myself back to sleep. But that's when I heard it, a soft click, a door closing somewhere nearby, then another one. And then, faintly at first, the sound of footsteps on the pavement outside. My curiosity got the better of me. I slid out of bed, crept to my bedroom window, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. Every single house on my street had lights on. Not all the lights, just one room per house. It was always the same room. Bedrooms, living rooms, home offices. And in those lit windows, I could see people. They were just standing there, not moving, not doing anything, just awake. At work the next day, the weirdness continued. I overheard a coworker ask another rough night. The other guy chuckled and replied, 3:17. They both laughed like it was some kind of inside joke. I couldn't help myself, I had to ask what they meant. "Oh, nothing," one of them said, suddenly avoiding my gaze. "Just one of those nights, you know?" But the way he said it, the way they both looked away, told me it wasn't nothing. It was something they didn't want to talk about. So, the next night, I decided to stay awake. I watched the clock on my phone. 2:45, 2:58, 3:10. The minutes dragged on. Then at exactly 3:17, the entire feeling of the room changed. It wasn't colder, it wasn't heavier. It felt attentive, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then, without me touching it, my phone screen lit up on its own. The time displayed was 3:17 a.m. At that very same moment, a sound echoed from outside, the sound of dozens of front doors all opening at once. My heart was pounding, but I had to know what was happening. I unlocked my front door and stepped out onto my porch. The sight was unreal. Every one of my neighbors was standing outside their homes, barefoot, silent, all facing the same direction, toward the center of town. No one spoke. No one even acknowledged my presence. Then, as if an invisible signal was given, they all started walking. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at me to run back inside and lock the door. But the thought of being the only one left behind felt infinitely worse. So I followed them. Hundreds of us moved through the darkened streets. There were no cars, no barking dogs, not even the sound of the wind. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic shuffling of hundreds of bare feet on asphalt. No one was leading the way, and no one was falling behind. We all just knew exactly where to go. Our destination was the town's old clock tower, sitting silent in the middle of the main square. It had been unused for years, a relic of a time long past. But tonight, its clock face was glowing with a faint, eerie light, and the time it displayed was frozen at 3:17. It didn't tick, the hands didn't move. My neighbors, my town, gathered around its base, forming a perfect, silent circle. Everyone was just standing there, still silent, still waiting. Nothing happened. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. No one checked the time, no one shifted their weight or even seemed to breathe. We just stood, a silent congregation under a frozen clock. Then, all at once, a sound broke the silence. The sound of hundreds of people inhaling sharply at the exact same moment. And then, the clock chimed. Just once. A deep, resonant bell that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my own bed. Morning sunlight was streaming through my window. My shoes, which I had left by the door, were caked with fresh mud. My legs ached like I'd run a marathon. The digital clock on my nightstand read 7:02 a.m. For a fleeting moment, I managed to convince myself that I had dreamed the entire thing. A vivid, terrifying nightmare. That delusion lasted until I decided to check the town's online community forum. The posts were all vague, but they were there. "Anyone else feeling extra tired lately?" someone had written. Another post asked, "Does anyone else remember being in the square last night?" And the one that chilled me to the core. Why do I feel like I did and come back alone? No one used the word sleepwalking. No one called it a dream. They all knew, on some subconscious level, that it was real. I had to talk to someone who might have answers. I went to visit Mrs. Calder, the oldest resident in town. She'd lived here her entire life, longer than anyone. When I told her what I'd seen, she didn't seem surprised at all. 3:17, she said, her voice a dry whisper. It's always been that time. My hands felt cold. What? What happens if someone doesn't wake up? I asked. Her gaze sharpened, and she stared at me with an intensity that was frightening. Stop waking up altogether. The third night I was determined to resist. I locked all my doors and windows. I turned off my phone and buried it in a drawer. I pulled my curtains tight, trying to block out the world. At 3:16, my heart started to race against my will, and the clock turned to 3:17, and something knocked. Not on my door. From inside my walls, it wasn't a loud banging. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like a polite but firm reminder. I squeezed my eyes shut and stayed in bed, pulling the covers over my head. But the tapping slowly morphed into the sound of footsteps, pacing back and forth inside the walls of my room. Then the footsteps became whispers. They weren't words I could understand. It was just counting. A low, continuous counting that seemed to come from everywhere at once. That night, I dreamed. I dreamed of the clock tower, and I saw its internal mechanism being wound tighter and tighter with each passing night. And every time the bell chimed, it pulled something out of us. Not blood or bone, but something more essential. Memories, dreams, our own choices. It left us feeling lighter, emptier, more precise, more in sync. The next day, I learned that one man in town hadn't woken up. They found him sitting upright in his bed, his eyes wide open, unblinking. He was alive, the paramedics said, but he was empty. He never spoke again. He never slept again. He just sat there day after day, waiting for something that would never come. And that's when I finally understood. 3:17 wasn't the time we woke up. It was the time we were checked, counted, adjusted. The old clock tower in the square didn't tell time. It synchronized us. It kept us all running on the same schedule, for a purpose I couldn't begin to imagine. I also understood why no one ever leaves this town. People who try to move away find they can't sleep anywhere else. Like in hotels, in their cars, in a new apartment in a different city. It doesn't matter. At 3:17 a.m., they wake up anyway. And they're overcome with a desperate, agonizing homesickness, a pull to return that they can't resist. I'm writing this down now, and the time is 3:12 a.m. My phone is face down on the table. My shoes are sitting by the front door. Outside, I can already hear the soft, familiar sounds of movement beginning. The quiet opening of doors, the first muffled footsteps on the pavement. If I don't go, I know I won't come back right. I'll end up like the man who missed his appointment. But if I do go, I probably won't remember writing any of this. It'll just be another night. So I have one question for you. If your town ever starts waking up together, if everyone around you insists that it's normal, if all the clocks suddenly stop moving at the same exact minute every single night, ask yourself this: who benefits from you always being on time? The tapping in my walls just stopped. That means they're waiting for me. I have to go now. Thank you for listening. Story 2. My apartment building sends out weekly schedules. My apartment building sends out weekly schedules. I know it sounds weird, but let me explain. The first schedule arrived on a Monday morning. It came from the building's management emailing address I recognized. It was the same one that sent out rent reminders and notices about water shutdowns. Subject line just said, "Weekly building schedule." I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam or a mistake, but something made me open it. No, it wasn't a calendar or a list of events. It was just a list. Time blocks, apartment numbers, and short, weirdly specific descriptions. For example, it would say, 7 o'clock to 7:20 a.m., Unit 304, morning routine. Or 8:45 to 9 a.m., Unit 611, departure window. There were no instructions, no explanations, just these sterile observations. I scrolled down the list and then I saw my apartment number, 6:30 to 6:50 p.m., Unit 417, return from work. That was accurate, comfortably, perfectly accurate. I get home right around that time every single day. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake, Maybe some internal notes for the maintenance staff to track when people were home. It clearly wasn't meant for residents. Still, it felt invasive. I replied to the email, politely asking to be removed from the list. I never got a response. And the next Monday, another schedule arrived right on time. This one was different. It had more entries, more time blocks for more apartments, and the details were getting even more specific. One entry read, 11:15 to 11:40 p.m., Unit 512, pacing, indecision. Another said, 2:10 to 2:30 a.m., Unit 203, awake, lights off. I started to recognize the subtle patterns of my neighbors' lives, the little habits and private moments that people don't usually advertise. It felt like reading someone's diary. That week, just to see what would happen, I decided to mess with it. I stayed late at work, deliberately breaking my routine. I didn't get home until almost 8 o'clock. The following Monday, the new schedule arrived and my entry had been updated. 7:55 to 8:10 p.m., Unit 417, delayed return. It wasn't a criticism or a warning. It just noted it, logged it, like I was a data point. This was getting too strange. I found our building superintendent, a quiet guy named Henry, down in the basement. I showed him the email on my phone. He just glanced at it, completely unfazed. "They're just estimates," he said, handing my phone back. "Estimates of what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Occupancy flow? It helps keep things efficient?" "Efficient for who?" I pressed. He hesitated for a second, looking around the empty basement. "For the building," he finally said, and then walked away. Efficient for the building? What did that even mean? I started paying closer attention, and I noticed it. People in the hallways moved with a new kind of purpose. Doors would open and close in little clusters, almost in unison. The elevators always seemed to fill up and empty out at predictable times. The whole building felt synchronized, like everyone was unconsciously following a shared routine that had settled over us. Then, in the third schedule I received, there was a line that stood out. It was just my unit number, and next to it the words, Unit 417, Schedule Deviation Discouraged. There was no time block, no explanation. Just that single ominous sentence. So of course, I had to test it. The next evening, I didn't go home after work. I just walked aimlessly through the city for hours, got dinner at a late-night diner, ignored the buzz of my phone in my pocket. When I finally got back to the building well after midnight, the lobby felt wrong, tense. The lights seemed brighter than usual, casting sharp, sterile shadows. The air was stale and heavy. Even the elevator felt different. It took much longer to arrive, its movements jerky and reluctant. The next schedule arrived early, landed in my inbox on Sunday night, not Monday morning. It had one line for me, Unit 417, Adjustment Pending. And underneath that, in smaller text, it said, Consistency improves overall performance. Performance of what? My performance. The building's performance? That was the week Unit 512 went quiet. That was the apartment listed for pacing indecision. The lights in their windows stayed off. Their mail started piling up in the lobby. And in the next schedule, their entries were just gone, no explanation. They were simply erased from the building's routine. A few days later, I overheard two neighbors talking quietly by the stairwell. They reassigned her, one of them whispered. "To where?" the other asked. The first one just shrugged, somewhere more suitable. After that, the tone of the emails changed completely. They weren't observations anymore. They were commands. 6 o'clock to 6:20 a.m., wake window. 6:20 to 6:45 a.m., hygiene. 7 o'clock to 7:15 a.m., exit preparation. It was the same for everyone. Not suggestions, declarations. I was done being polite. I replied to the email again. This time my tone was firm. I demanded clarification. I asked who was authorizing this surveillance. I asked about consent. The response was instantaneous. A single chilling sentence. Participation is implicit upon residency. At night, the building started to feel alive. The hallways had this soft, rhythmic hum. Well, it wasn't the sound of electricity or pipes. It felt like breathing. I'd see doors perfectly aligned down the hall. All the lights in the windows would dim at the exact same moment. The building slept, but not like a collection of people. It slept like a single organism. And then, my dreams started to follow the schedule. I'd jolt awake at 2:30 a.m., the exact time listed for a rest period interruption for a different unit. I'd have this persistent, unnerving feeling of being watched, even in my sleep. The building wasn't just tracking our behavior anymore. It was influencing it, directing it. One day, my scheduled slot changed. My return window was moved earlier. 6:10 to 6:25 p.m., Unit 417, return. I hadn't changed my job. Hours hadn't changed. The building had decided my hours needed to change. Then came the email about a mandatory floor meeting. No date was given, just a time block. 8 o'clock to 8:30 p.m., all units, attendance. Attendance. We all gathered in the lobby. There were no chairs, no one from management to speak to us. We just stood there in uncomfortable silence, dozens of us, looking at each other. Then, the main lobby lights pulsed once, brightly, and that was it. The meeting was over. The next schedule that arrived was cleaner, tighter, more efficient. That's when I finally understood. The building wasn't just organizing us for our own good. It was learning from us. It was running experiments, testing different routines, removing inefficiencies, and eliminating any and all unpredictability. We weren't residents. We're variables in an equation. And some people, they thrived. They fit into the system perfectly. They moved smoothly through the building, never hesitating, never deviating from their assigned slots. Their schedules on the weekly emails grew shorter and simpler, and eventually they stopped receiving the emails altogether. They didn't need reminders anymore. They had become part of the building's perfect, silent rhythm. My final notice arrived last night, Unit 417, integration incomplete, and below that, manual compliance recommended. I'm telling you all of this because this morning I found a piece of paper slipped under my door. It was a printed schedule. My entire day, mapped out minute by minute, with no gaps. No room for choice, no room for error. So if you ever get an email like that, a schedule from a place you live, if it seems to know when you hesitate, if deviating from its plan makes the air feel tense, and if following it, complying, starts to feel strangely comfortable, please be careful. Because once a place learns your routine well enough, it stops needing you to decide anything at all. Thanks for listening. Story 3. My city installed new sirens that don't warn about emergencies. The sirens went off for the first time on a Wednesday afternoon. No alert beforehand, no explanation afterward. At exactly 2 p.m., a low, even tone rolled across the city. It wasn't loud enough to hurt, and not sharp enough to cause a panic. It was just persistent, like something very large clearing its throat. I saw people on the sidewalk stop walking. Cars slowed down, their brake lights flickering on. Conversations just faded out. The sound lasted for exactly 1 minute. Then it stopped, and life resumed. No one screamed, no one ran. No one even seemed to ask any questions. That was the part that bothered me the most, the complete lack of reaction. That night, the local news finally mentioned it. A tiny little line scrolled across the bottom of the screen while the anchor was talking about traffic. It just said systems test. No details, no follow-up, nothing. I accepted it. It made a certain kind of sense. Sirens are for emergencies. Emergencies require preparation, and preparation requires testing. The logic was sound, till the second siren. This one happened late, 11:30 p.m., same tone, same 1 minute duration. But afterward, the city felt different. It was quieter, not just a sleep quiet, but contained. I stepped out onto my balcony. Lights were still on in the apartments across the way. I could see people, my neighbors, standing at their windows, but they weren't looking outward at the skyline. They were all looking down toward the empty streets. The next morning, the city released an official statement. It was short and frankly, a little weird. New public alert infrastructure has been installed, it read. These signals do not indicate danger. That one sentence just stuck with me, repeating in my head. If they don't indicate danger, then what exactly do they indicate? By the end of the week, The sirens had found a pattern. 2 o'clock p.m., 6:30 p.m., 11:30 p.m. Always the same times, always exactly 1 minute. And people just adjusted without any discussion. I was in a meeting that week when the 2 o'clock siren went off. Everyone just paused mid-sentence. At a restaurant, the whole place went silent. I even heard the elevators would stop between floors and then just resume a minute later. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath together. During the 4th siren of the week, I decided to try something. I kept walking. Everyone else on the street stopped. They just froze in place. The sound washed over me, and nothing happened. No pain, no consequence. But when the siren ended, I realized something deeply unsettling. I was the only person who had moved. Every single person around me was still frozen, waiting for some invisible signal to start again. After that, people didn't confront me, but they definitely noticed. I started getting these looks, glances that lingered just a second too long. A cashier hesitated before taking my money, her eyes flicking over my face. My neighbor, who was usually pretty friendly, just gave me this stiff, formal nod. It felt like I violated some unspoken rule of etiquette that I hadn't even known existed. The 3rd siren of the day, the one at 11:30 p.m., always felt heavier. When it sounded, the whole city seemed to dim slightly. The streetlights softened, windows darkened. When the sound stopped, you could hear the doors closing almost in unison. The click of locks engaging. The city didn't just go to sleep. It withdrew. I had to ask someone. I knew a guy who worked for the city, just a casual acquaintance. Caught him one afternoon and just asked, point blank, "What are the sirens really for?" He looked around, then lowered his voice. "They're not warnings," he said. "They're markers." I pressed him. Markers for what? He hesitated for a long time. "For phases," he said finally, and then he just walked away. Phases. After that, I started listening more carefully. Not to the sirens, but to people. They were referencing time differently now. I'd hear phrases like, "Oh, let's meet after the 2nd sound," or "have to get this done before the late one," or "just wait until the next." Clocks mattered less, the sirens mattered more. I started to pay attention to what was happening during the sound itself. The air felt dense, not heavy, but present. I became intensely aware of my own body in a way I normally wasn't. My breathing would slow down, my thoughts would narrow to a single point, and the impulse to move, to do anything, just felt unnecessary. It was comfortable, and that scared me more than anything. One morning I was checking a transit map online. The routes had been adjusted, stops were removed. The city's whole layout had become simpler, more efficient. Entire streets I used to drive down were just gone from the map, not closed for construction, just absent. I started noticing some people too. They'd linger a little too long after the siren ended, just standing still, staring into space. Eventually they'd resume moving, but slower and more deliberately, like they were following a set of instructions only they could hear. Then a 4th siren was added. 3:45 a.m. I didn't hear it at first. I felt it. I woke up with my heart already calm, already prepared. I looked outside and my entire building was glowing faintly. Every window had a light on. People were standing there, awake, waiting. I started digging. I spent days looking for something, anything. Finally, buried deep on a city server, I found an old planning document. Most of it was redacted, blacked out. But one phrase remained untouched. Temporal alignment improves compliance. Compliance with what? That's when I finally understood. Slowly, painfully. The sirens weren't telling us what to do. They were teaching us when to be, when to pause, when to return, when to rest, when to notice. The city wasn't being warned. It was being synchronized. The entire population trained into a single, unified rhythm. I tried to leave. During the 6:30 siren, I got in my car and tried to drive out of town. The traffic just stopped. Every engine idled. No one honked. No one panicked. They just waited. The traffic lights, they waited too. The moment the siren ended, a minute later, traffic resumed, perfectly, as if nothing had happened. Some people did leave. They packed up their things and moved away. but they came back. It's not right away, and not willingly. I spoke to one family who returned after a month. They said they couldn't sleep anywhere else, couldn't focus, couldn't even breathe right. They said time itself just felt wrong. One night, between the scheduled sounds, I heard something else. It was faint, a lower tone, deeper. It wasn't broadcast from speakers. It felt resonant, like it was coming from the ground itself. It felt ancient, like the city was responding to something deep beneath it. The purpose was finally clear. The sirens were never for emergencies. They were for maintenance, not of the roads or the power grid, of the people, aligning us to the city's rhythm, reducing friction, removing the messy, unpredictable nature of human behavior. One afternoon during the 2 o'clock siren, I stopped resisting. I was walking down the street and I just stopped. I stood still. I listened. And the calm that washed over me felt immediate. It felt rewarding. It's like I was finally doing something right. And that terrified me more than the resistance ever did. Last week, I visited another town. No sirens, no pauses. People moved chaotically. They were loud. The whole place felt like an assault on the senses. I felt overstimulated, anxious, unanchored. I couldn't handle it. I left early and came back here. The 6:30 siren just sounded. I paused what I was doing. So did everyone else in my building. Felt natural, necessary, correct. And that's why I'm recording this now, before the next one. Before I stop thinking of them as strange, as I've realized the most dangerous thing of all. Once you stop hearing a warning as a warning, it becomes instruction. Thanks for listening. Story 4. The bus route outside my house doesn't exist during the day. The bus stop across from my apartment had always been there. At least I thought it had. It's just a metal pole, a faded sign, and a bench with chipped blue paint. I noticed it the way you notice trees or fire hydrants. It was just part of the landscape. Unimportant, unquestioned. But there was something strange about it. During the day, I never once saw a bus stop there. At night, though, at night I always did. The first time I really paid attention was late one evening, around 11:45 p.m. I was walking home when I saw headlights approaching slowly. It was a bus, but not one of the usual city ones. There were no colorful ads, no bright branding. It was just a dull gray, with a simple route number painted on the side. Route 61. It pulled up to the stop across the street. The doors hissed open. No one got off. No one got on. A few seconds passed, then the doors closed, and it pulled away into the darkness. Something about it felt deeply wrong. I crossed the street and looked at the bus stop sign. It listed only one route, no schedule, no destination, just the number. The next morning I looked out my window and the sign was gone. The pole was gone. The bench was gone. It was just a clean, empty stretch of sidewalk. I figured I must have imagined it. It had to be exhaustion, stress, a late-night hallucination. During the day, there was absolutely no sign of a bus stop. No markings on the pavement, no worn patch of grass, nothing. It was like it had never existed. But that night, at exactly 11:45, I looked again. The bus stop was back. It's perfectly placed, waiting. I decided not to go near it this time. Instead, I watched from my apartment window. It's right on schedule at 11:45. The gray bus arrived. The doors opened. This time, someone stepped off. It was a woman. She stood still for a moment, blinking like she'd just woken up in a strange place. Then, without a single look back, she walked down the street and disappeared around the corner. The bus left, but the stop remained, a silent fixture in the night. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I saw a neighbor getting her mail and decided to ask. "Hey," I started, trying to sound casual. "Have you ever seen a bus stop across the street?" She frowned, thinking. "You mean at night?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She shook her head firmly. "No, there's no bus stop there." Then she hesitated, her voice dropping a little. "At least there isn't supposed to be." Her words chilled me. That night, and for many nights after, I watched. I started to notice a pattern. Sometimes people would get off the bus. Sometimes others would be waiting to get on. They never spoke to each other. They never hesitated. They just boarded the bus like it was the most routine, necessary thing in the world. And every night, a little after midnight, the bus stop would simply disappear again, leaving no trace. My curiosity turned into an obsession. I scoured the city's transit maps. I looked through online schedules and even searched through archived route listings for any mention of Route 61. There was nothing. It never existed. No retired line, no temporary reroutes. It was a ghost. Then, one night, something changed. The bus arrived early. My clock said 11:38 p.m. It pulled up to the stop, and the doors opened. But no one got on or off. The driver didn't look back at the empty street. The interior lights cast a soft, inviting glow. And as I stood there, watching from my window, I felt an unmistakable sensation. A pull. It was waiting. It was waiting for me. My heart pounded, but I had to know. I walked outside and cautiously approached the open doors. The driver finally turned his head. His face was calm, unexpressive, almost unfinished. Like a sketch that hadn't been filled in. "You're late?" he said, his voice flat. I've never ridden this bus before," I stammered. He just nodded slowly. "Most people say that? Where does it go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The driver seemed to consider this for a long moment. "Where you stopped going," he said finally. I was confused. "Work?" I asked. "No, home." He shook his head. "Earlier," he said. "Before you adjusted." Before I could ask what he meant, I looked past him, into the bus. The seats were all occupied. People sat staring straight ahead, their faces blank. And then I saw them, recognized some of them. A teacher I'd had in high school, an old coworker who'd suddenly moved away years ago, a friend who just stopped calling one day. None of them looked at me. None of them even blinked. They just looked settled. "You don't have to get on," the driver said, pulling me from my trance. "But if you don't, you won't be able to later." "Why not?" I asked. "The route shortens," he replied, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "It always does." I didn't get on that night. But the driver's words proved true. Each night after that, the bus stop appeared slightly nearer. First, it was a few feet closer to my building, then it was right at the curb. Then, one night, it materialized directly in front of my front door. The route number was always the same, Route 61. I kept watching the passengers. Some riders boarded, and I never saw them again. But others, I'd see them get off weeks, sometimes months later. They looked different. Lighter, somehow, quieter, as if a heavy, invisible burden had been taken from them. But none of them stayed in the neighborhood for long. They always moved away shortly after. One night, driven by a desperate need for answers, I stepped onto the first step of the bus. Just one foot. The bus hummed, a low vibration that I felt in my bones. Instantly, images flooded my head. Not memories, but possibilities. Moments in my life I'd abandoned, choices I'd delayed, paths I'd considered but never taken. It was overwhelming. I recoiled, stepping back onto the pavement. The doors closed immediately and the bus pulled away. The next afternoon in the bright sunlight, I noticed something new. On the concrete where the bus stop appeared at night, there was a faint outline, a shadow. It was barely visible, but it was there. It was like the city itself remembered the bus stop, even when it tried to pretend it didn't. "You don't have many nights left," the driver told me the next time I saw him. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because you've been noticed," he said. "Noticed by who?" "By the route." A few nights later, as I was watching from my window, hesitating, I saw a stranger from my building walk out. He looked tired and lost. He stepped onto the bus without a second thought. The doors closed, and it drove away. The next morning, his apartment was empty. For rent sign was already on the door. When I asked the building manager about him, she had no idea who I was talking about. It was like he'd been erased. That's when I finally understood. Route 61 doesn't just transport people, it redistributes them. It moves the unresolved lives out of the way, the people stuck in hesitation. It keeps the city efficient, uncluttered. The last time I spoke to the driver, I asked him where the bus truly goes. "What's the final destination?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. "It doesn't have a name," he said. "It's where you finish things. It's 11:42 p.m. Now, the bus stop is already outside my door. I can hear the engine running. The doors are open, spilling that soft, warm light onto my welcome mat. I still haven't decided if I'm getting on, but the route is patient. It always has been. So if you ever see a bus at night that isn't on any map, be careful. Check the route number. If it's a route you've never heard of, if it only runs when you're tired and lost, if it feels strangely, deeply familiar, you have to be careful. Some routes don't take you somewhere new. They take you back to where you should have gone years ago. Story 5. My reflection started arriving a few seconds late. The bathroom mirror was just there, you know? It was rectangular, a bit foggy around the edges, and always hung a little too high. It wasn't special. It wasn't creepy or old. It just reflected, which is probably why it took me so long to notice when it stopped doing that properly. It started one morning while I was brushing my teeth. I raised my hand to my mouth, and my reflection did the same, but not immediately. There was a pause, a tiny, almost unnoticeable delay, maybe half a second. Just enough to make me stop and stare. I waved my hand again, slowly this time, and there it was again. My reflection followed, but it was late. My first thought. I was just tired. Stress, right? I've been working crazy hours, not sleeping well, waking up feeling all disoriented. The brain does weird things when it's exhausted. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a sign I needed more sleep. I finished brushing and left, trying not to think too much about it. But that night I had to be sure. I stood in front of the mirror, heart pounding a little, and did a simple test. I counted to 3 in my head, then blinked. My reflection blinked too. But after I did, it wasn't a huge gap, but it was undeniable. My stomach twisted into a knot. This wasn't just fatigue. I went on a frantic tour of my apartment, checking every reflective surface I could find. The full-length mirror in the hallway, the shiny door of the microwave, even the dark screen of my turned-off TV. The reflection in the bathroom mirror was the only one with the problem. The others were perfect, instantaneous copies of me. The problem wasn't with me, it was with that one specific mirror. Over the next few days, it got worse. The delay grew. From half a second to a full second, then 2. By Friday, it was genuinely bizarre. I could raise my hand, put it back down, and then watch my reflection slowly lift its own arm, like it was replaying my actions on a time delay. It wasn't glitchy or distorted. It was just slow, deliberate. Almost like it had to think before it copied me. And the way it looked, it was still me. Same tired eyes, same messy hair, same t-shirt. But the longer the delay became, the more wrong it felt. Not just because it moved late, but because of how it moved. Each motion felt considered, calculated. I knew I had to get proof to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I set up my phone on the counter and hit record. I stood in front of the mirror and waved. In the video, you could see it plain as day, me waving, and then a few seconds later, my reflection waving. The delay was real, was there on camera. I hadn't imagined it. I needed another person to see this. I invited my friend Mark over, didn't give him any context. I just stood him in the bathroom with me, right in front of the mirror. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. He just frowned. "See what?" "The delay," I said. "Look, my reflection. It's lagging." He looked at me, then at the mirror, then back at me. "Man, there's no delay," he said, looking confused. "You guys are perfectly in sync." And just as he said that, I watched my reflection raise its hand. My own hand stayed right at my side. From his perspective, everything was normal. He saw 2 people, me and my reflection, moving in perfect unison. The delay only existed for me. Or, to be more precise, it existed in the space between me and my reflection. That night was when everything truly broke. I stood there staring, and I lifted my hand. My reflection didn't move. It just stood perfectly still, watching me. I slowly lowered my arm, my heart hammering against my ribs. The reflection remained motionless. And then, after a long, silent moment, it raised its own hand, as if it were the one conducting the test now. Panic finally set in. I stumbled back from the sink, away from the mirror, but the reflection didn't move back with me. It stayed right at the front of the glass, seeming closer than it should be. In a flash of pure terror, I slammed the light switch off. The bathroom went dark, but for a split second, the reflection remained, illuminated by nothing before it finally faded away. That night, I had the strangest dreams. I was in rooms with no reflective surfaces. No mirrors, no windows, no polished metal, not even a puddle of water. In the dream, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, of safety, but I also felt incomplete. Like a fundamental part of my world was missing. The next morning, I forced myself to go back. I stood in front of the mirror again, my fear mixing with a morbid curiosity. "Can you hear me?" I whispered. My reflection didn't speak. Its mouth didn't move with mine. But then, several seconds later, its lips formed words. Words I hadn't even spoken yet. And that's when I understood. It wasn't reacting to me anymore. It was anticipating me. It wasn't copying what I did. It was predicting what I was about to do. Then came the first real difference. I was staring at my face, at the dark circles under my eyes. When I saw it, my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. I touched my own lips. My expression was completely neutral. But the reflection just kept on smiling. It wasn't a big, malicious grin. It was a small, subtle, satisfied smile. The very next day, the true horror began. I walked into the bathroom, and my reflection moved first. It blinked, and the moment later I felt my own eyes blink. The synchronization was gone. It wasn't lagging anymore. It was leading. From that day on, I couldn't tell who was in control. Sometimes I'd move and it would follow a split second later. Other times it would act, and my body would mimic the motion. Our actions were constantly drifting, overlapping, but never quite matching. We were two versions of the same person, slowly coming out of alignment. I started noticing patterns in its behavior. My reflection was calmer than me, more composed. It didn't fidget or pace nervously like I did. It never hesitated. It moved with a quiet confidence, like someone who knew exactly what was coming next, because they were the one deciding it. It wasn't just learning my movements anymore. It was learning my habits. How I brushed my teeth, how I instinctively avoided making eye contact with myself. It was studying me, analyzing me, and refining me. One day I walked out of the bathroom, and I felt a strange emptiness. I knew, without having to look back, that my reflection had stayed behind. It was still in there, standing, watching. Even when I couldn't see it, I could feel its presence. I started avoiding mirrors at night, covering them with towels, turning them to face the wall. But it didn't help. I could still sense it, this patient presence on the other side of the glass, just waiting for its turn. One morning, I found words condensed on the mirror, as if written in fog. "You move too slowly." I didn't wipe them away. They just faded on their own. And I finally understood its purpose. Reflection wasn't broken. It was an upgrade. It was trying to remove my hesitation, smooth out my indecision. It was becoming a more efficient, more perfect version of me. Then came the offer. It didn't speak aloud. Its lips moved in the mirror, and the thought just appeared in my head. Let me lead. I thought about it. I imagined what that would be like. To wake up without a single doubt, to move without hesitation, to live without constantly second-guessing every choice. The reflection promised me ease, clarity, a life without anxiety. But what if I said no? The delay, the divergence, it would just keep growing. Our actions would drift further and further apart until one of us became completely irrelevant, unnecessary. Last night, I woke up early. I tiptoed into the bathroom, trying to be silent. My reflection was already there, awake, standing, already looking at me. It raised its hand before I even had the thought to. A perfect, confident, practiced motion. I'm writing this now with the mirror uncovered. My reflection is perfectly still. It's just watching me, waiting. The lag is gone. The delay is gone. Everything it does feels ready. So, if you ever look in a mirror and your reflection seems to lag, even for a split second, pay attention. If it starts predicting you instead of copying you, if it looks more certain than you feel, if it seems prepared for a life you haven't lived yet, be careful. Because reflections don't want to replace you. They want to finish you. Thanks for listening.